It's time now to visit the wonderful world of the great outdoors with the Southern Sportsman, Frank White. Today's show is brought to you in part by House Autry, proven cornmeal and flour products. By Happy Jack Incorporated, manufacturers of animal health products since 1946. By Chatham Pet Foods, premium quality dog food at an affordable price. By Seacat Power Catamaran, you will think you're floating on air. And by Log Cabin Homes Limited. When it comes to quality, we set the standards.
Today we will look at sea trout that are and at sea trout that were, and cook fruited wild rice stuffing in the kitchen. This has become an extremely popular side dish at my house. I found it in a magazine, and it was presented as a side dish. The idea for the stuffing is mine, and I know it works great. You can stuff anything with it. You can stuff fish, waterfowl, a duck or a goose, your Christmas turkey, your Thanksgiving hen, whatever. I got it out of this new little magazine. It's called Tasteful. It's a quarterly, printed down just in North Carolina, and it's food and travel and entertainment and so forth, and it looks like it's a good little magazine. It's about a year old, and I wish them good luck with it, but I saw this recipe, and I knew the minute I saw it that it would be good as a side dish and as a stuffing for, as I say, almost anything. You might want to take a couple of real thick pork chops and cut a pouch in them and stuff some of this in there. That would be a good way to use it, is stuffing. Now, when you see the recipe, you'll see what I'm talking about. You take long grain and wild rice and cook it according to the instructions on the package, except you use chicken broth instead of water. Most of you, when you cook rice, most of the instructions say use water. Use a little butter, use chicken broth, and they don't have the right size cans anymore because they always change in prices, and every time they go up, they have to change the size of the can so that you don't catch them in the act of going up. You can buy chicken broth in 10.5-ounce cans, or you can buy them in 14.5-ounce cans. Once upon a time, cans had 8 ounces in them, or they had 16 ounces, or they had 24 ounces, or 32. They came in cups, pints, and quarts, but they don't do that anymore. So what I do is just take one of these 14.5-ounce cans and add 2 or 3 ounces of water to it to get my 2 cups of chicken broth. And while I show you what I'm going to do here, I've already cooked the rice in the interest of time, but he'll show you the recipe. You take the long grain and wild rice after it has been cooked and put in a half a cup of chopped red apple. Now, I cooked it in the broth and the margarine already. Put in a half a cup of chopped delicious apple and a quarter of a cup of currants or raisins. And I like lots of raisins. You can just serve this, as I say, as a side dish. You don't have to have something in the stove that needs stuffing. A couple of tablespoons of chopped fresh parsley. And the rice and everything has already been cooked, and it's steaming hot, as you can see there. And all you do is mix it all up and go ahead and stuff whatever it is, whether it's a rabbit, duck, or whatever that you want to stuff, and cook it, or put it in a bowl and bring it to the table. But I like to let it sit for 15 or 20 minutes or so in order for the raisins and the chopped up pieces of apple and everything like that to get nice and warm, so that the whole thing is warm all the way through. Take my word for it, it's delicious, and it's so easy, it's just unbelievable. But everybody that I've served it to loves it. I'll be back here in a minute. We're going down and look at some sea trout that are, and then I'm going to take you and show you what they used to be like after these very important messages. I live just a short distance from the farm in Greene County down to Pamlico Sound in North Carolina. which, in my opinion, and as I have said here many times before, is the major nursery for fish and shellfish for the entire Atlantic seaboard. It's the second largest estuary in the country, second only in size to Chesapeake Bay, but it's located in more temperate, more moderate, tropical, closer to tropical waters, and it's shallow. The deepest point in it is 25 feet, and it's just a big, normal, natural nursery. It's heavily exploited. It has been a major sport fishing hole in the entire world. People have come from all over to go there and fish. From the farm down to my friend George Suggs' house at Belle Haven is about an hour and 10 minutes. You may remember I went down there and speckled trout fish with George a few weeks ago, a couple of months. And I went back down there recently. He had told me that when the gray trout got started, he would give me a call, and he gave me a call, and he said, we're beginning to catch a few. He said they're small, but it's the right time of year. The weather has been right. Now, that's George driving the boat, and to his left, the gentleman you're looking at now is Charles Clark. Both have retired and have moved to Belle Haven. This is a friend of theirs coming in. We went out early in the morning, shortly after sunrise, and this friend of theirs had been out fishing his gill nets for flounder, and he said he had a whole bucket full, but he held up a couple of them there. It's early fall, and the snowbirds were headed for Miami and Bermuda and South America, wherever they go, but you can see a parade this time of year headed south across Pamlico Sound in the Intercoastal Waterway, heading down in the general direction of South Georgia and Florida and other parts. We went first for the speckled trout hole. George likes to go real early in the morning, shortly after sunrise, and try for speckled trout. We don't catch speckled trout like we used to. You go now, and if you're lucky, you get into a few. You might catch 12 or 15 or 20, whereas once upon a time you could catch 40 or 50 without any difficulty at all on one tide. We fished there about 45 minutes or an hour, somewhere in that range, and caught 3 trout. And this was the first one we caught and the only keeper. There's a size limit now on speckled trout. There didn't used to be. And he had tangled up in a gill net. He had a piece of gill net wrapped around him. Maybe you remember on that previous speckled trout trip that we went on, I told you that we went to several different places, and at 4 of them we found gill nets stretched across them so that you couldn't fish him. In some states, you're required to attend gill nets if you put them out. We caught 3 speckled trout in this one particular hole. 2 of them were undersized. Only one of them was a keeper. These guys over there, they were fishing too. This guy had a nice one on, and I think his buddy must have resented it because I think he knocked him off with the landing net. Buddies will do that way sometimes. If you're catching more than they are, especially trout fishermen, he'll take the net, knock the fish off that you're trying to get into the boat so that you don't surpass him. Well, we went out right in the middle of Pamlico Sound. It was a gorgeous day, as you can see here. Pamlico Sound can get very rough, and when you get in the middle of it, you can't see land in any direction. It's about 30 miles by 50 miles, somewhere in that general range, but it's a huge body of water. And we're fishing in water about 18 or 19 feet deep. What you need to do is find where the bottom is rough, where there's oysters or clam shells, because that's where these fish like to hang around. There were a couple of other boats with us. George knew the guys that were in the other boats. And this is what we were catching. Little stuff the size of your hand or smaller. We caught a lot of croakers. Every time you drop down there, you catch a little croaker. And occasionally a pretty fair-sized spot. But we caught croakers as small as 3 inches or 4 inches. There's a ton of croakers in the Sound this year, but they're all little. And not for years have we been able to catch any big ones. We're just not getting big croakers. Now, they were not close enough for me to film, but there were 6 or 7 trawlers on the horizon. They were a long distance away from us, all during the day. And they are not shrimp trawling. Shrimpers trawl at night. This is a little sand perch. We caught a lizard fish, we caught a pinfish, we caught a few spots, but mostly we caught croakers. And there were 7 of us there in the 3 boats. The other 2 boats had 2 guys apiece in there. And the total catch for the entire morning was 11 gray trout. Now, 15 years ago, you could go out here in Pamlico Sound anywhere in water 18 to 20 feet deep and catch 150 or 200 trout. That's one of the 11 that we caught there. But we fished all morning and finally gave up. Got tired of catching those little bitty croakers. Now, these trawlers are permitted to keep up to 1,000 pounds of what is known as bycatch. This is a little gray trout, and that's as big a one as we caught. They don't have much chance to get any bigger than that these days. Used to, once upon a time, you catch 2, 3, 4 pound trout, a pound or 3/4 pound trout, you'd throw back. You wouldn't bother to keep him. Now you've got to work hard for 7 guys to catch 11 gray trout out of Pamlico Sound that once upon a time was a fishing paradise. A lot of things contribute to it. Water pollution is one of the biggest causes. There's one, we caught 2 gray trout in our boat that morning. And finally, we went back to the speckled trout and tried them, but had about the same success that we had before. We ended up the day with 11 gray trout and 1 keeper speckled trout. All the other fish were undersized. In North Carolina, in Pamlico Sound, trawlers are allowed to keep 1,000 pounds of bycatch. Bycatch is the little baby fish that they catch while they're trawling for shrimp. As I say, the guys that are trawling in the daytime, I don't know what they're after, because most of the trawlers, the most shrimp activity, the shrimp come out and move around at night. And most of your shrimpers are out there trawling at night. Whatever they're going for in the daytime, they're allowed to keep up to 1,000 pounds. And when you've got a little fish 3 or 4 inches long that weighs 1.5 ounces or 2 ounces, you can imagine how many of them it takes to make 1,000 pounds of fertilizer and cat food and whatever it is they do with them. That's not the way it used to be, and I'm going to show you the way it used to be in a couple of minutes after these very important messages. Well, as I say, it did used to be that way. There's a lot of pressure on fish from sportsmen as well as commercial fishermen. It's not just the commercial fishermen that's getting all the fish. The sportsmen obviously are out there trying to get their share. Everybody's having to settle for less and less. The population of seafood all over the world is going down at the same time that we've come out with more sophisticated technological devices to find out where the fish are. A fish doesn't have much of a chance these days. I've often been heard to say that of all the things that I'm glad I was not born as, the number one thing right at the top of my list I'm happy I was not born as is a shad. But I've about reached the attitude that I'm glad I wasn't born a fish of any kind, because everybody is out there after them, plus the fact of water pollution and everything else. The film that I'm going to show you now was shot 15 years ago in Pamlico Sound, just a few miles from that film that you just saw. This is heading out of the other side of the sound. Now, this film I showed you a few minutes ago was heading out of Belhaven. This is out of Hatteras, but it's all the same thing. You can take a boat of any size that's safe out there on that water and go to the middle of the sound from almost anywhere. It's a big circle. All you got to do is just go put it in a launching ramp somewhere around the perimeter of the thing, and head out until your depth finder tells you when you're in the proper depth of water. Now, it was a little rougher on this particular day, but we ran out about 7 or 8 miles out into the Sound, and I dropped a Hopkins spoon down. You can tell this film is 15 years ago. I was not bowed and stooped and gray and old and tired like I am now. This was my younger days, and I hadn't turned quite so gray-headed. I was fishing with two guys that I knew from Greenville, Jim Bordeaux and Joe Vernelson. Since this film was shot, Jim has left us. Jim Bordeaux, he worked for the public broadcasting system. He was a television technician. This is Jim. Jim had a heart attack and died not too long ago, a couple, 3 years back. This is Joe Vernelson from Greenville. We started catching fish immediately. Now, we had driven from Greenville to Hatteras and put in and run out in the Sound. It's a 4-hour drive one way. We were gone 10 hours. We drove down there 4 hours, went out in the Sound and fished a little less than 2 hours, went back and loaded the boat. In 10 hours from the time we had left, we were back in Greenville with 84 trout. When we first started fishing, we were keeping what we were picking up, but every time you would drop a Hopkins spoon down to the bottom, a trout would get on it. And finally, we quit taking the little ones, and by little ones I mean anything under 2 pounds, we started throwing back. We had a few fish in there that we had caught early that were under 2 pounds. But after a few minutes of this, and we were having trouble filming because everybody, you drop a spoon down, everybody would get a fish on. And of course, they have a thin mouth. They're called weak fish because of that tissue paper mouth they have. If you leave them on a lure down in the water while you grab the camera to take somebody else's picture, more often than not, they'll wear a hole in the mouth and get off. So I don't know how many we lost. The biggest fish we caught weighed 6.5 pounds. As I say, after the first few we caught, a dozen or so, we quit keeping anything under about 2 pounds, anything under about 18 or 19 inches, we would throw back. We had a big ice chest, and when we left because there wasn't room in the ice chest for any ice. We filled it level full with fish, and we didn't want the fish to spoil. And we had all the fishing that we wanted. This was a typical day. This is what could happen 15 years ago, back in the 70s. This is a party boat. We quit fishing and started following this party boat for a while, cleaning up its trash. Everybody on board was drinking all sorts of canned drinks and everything like that. And I said, well, let's just get a little film here of policing up Pamlico Sound. So we quit fishing. We had an ice chest crammed full, absolutely solid, chock full. And so we went around there and picked up a few cans and waved at the guys in the party boat and said, how about not throwing your trash overboard? And went home. We were gone 10 hours. 8 hours of that was driving. We had 84 gray trout, most of whom weighed 2 pounds or more, anywhere from 2 pounds up to 6.5 pounds. Those days are gone forever, my friends. I will be back here in a minute with the clipping of the week after these very important messages. Well, that's the way it used to be, and as I say, it probably never will be that way again. Gray trout are no longer even considered a recreational fish in North Carolina anymore. The reason I keep hammering about Pamlico Sound is because it's our second largest estuary in this country. But in my opinion, it is the absolute most valuable body of water in the entire country and maybe on the entire planet, because it's temperate water, it's shallow water, it's fed by Gulf Stream waters, and it is a huge, enormous nursery. and it should be protected from all forms of netting and everything else. Now, let me correct one thing here. I've said several times on there that the bycatch is allowed 1,000 pounds a day. Those people are allowed to keep 5,000 pounds of those baby fish, and they get 3 or 4 cents a pound for them at the cat food factory. They freeze them for bait, for crab pots, and they make fertilizer out of them. They do all sorts of things with them, but they're worth 3 or 4 cents a pound when they're only 3 or 4 inches long. And the bycatch compared to the commercial catch of the flounder and the shrimp and everything else that they catch is simply enormous. 5,000 pounds a day, but at 3 or 4 cents a pound, it will pay for the gasoline. And that's the reason that the commercial fishermen want that bycatch. Now, praise the Lord, the biggest newspaper down east has finally taken an editorial stand about this. This is called Cornering the Blues, and they're talking about Hall seining bluefish, but they're also saying here something that I have been saying for many years. Shrimp trawling must be moved out of Pamlico Sound because of its unconscionable bycatch. 10 pounds of baby fish for each pound of shrimp on the average. Fish excluding devices on the trawls remain inadequate. We're getting help. Ask any guy from Nam on patrol how lonesome it gets out there on the point. I've been out there on the point for years. 2 years ago, I did the bluefish story that was done a few weeks ago in the newspaper. But it's nice to have company. It's a little late, but better late than never, and the fight continues. That's all the time we have. We will see you here next week. Please do not litter, and do yourself a favor. Take a girl fishing.
The Southern Sportsman with outdoorsman Frank White has been brought to you in part by House Autry, proven cornmeal and flour products. By Happy Jack Incorporated, manufacturer of animal health products since 1946. By Chatham Pet Foods, premium quality dog food at an affordable price. By Seacat Power Catamaran, you'll think you are floating on air. And by Log Cabin Homes Limited. When it comes to quality, we set the standards.